Right, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here, and I want to particularly mention how impressive it is what has been achieved in the last 25 years. And in that regard, having heard the speeches last night and having heard about the work of the Council of the Latvian Communities, as well as the Center for the Judaic Studies and the museum, altogether, these organizations have, I think, made a lot possible. And I've been to Latvia about 8 times already. And in coming to Latvia, I've seen enormous changes culturally. And it's been absolutely wonderful, I think, what has been achieved in the time period. And I particularly want to also mention appreciation that this conference was actually put together by Gita Umanovska and Ruben Ferber and Ilya Lenski, and the fact that in record time it was put together, and I'm so impressed with the quality of the material. Usually when I go to a conference for a week, I'm lucky to go to maybe 7 talks that are good. Here in 1.5 days, I'll be going to more than that. So you've compressed in 1.5 days what the average conference would only achieve for a participant in probably a week. In talking about genealogy, what I particularly want to talk about going behind, as it were, the branches of the trees. And if this technical item will work, then I'll be able to move. Now, when you look at the family tree, that is what many people do. They try to put together as many names as possible, and in doing so, they feel they've achieved something. And they compare numbers, and I would say it's more than just a numerical equation. Now, people say to me, look, I'd like to find family, I want to put together a family tree. And what I find, there are 3 real main points in regard to putting together a genealogical composition of a family. The first aspect, I would say, is people. In other words, who were the people, finding out the names of the people. But people, in being researched, it's not enough. On top of that, you also have to find what are called places. Now, where did they come from? But then in research, it's more than the place names of where they came from. It also becomes the places where you do actual research. So you may find that you're tracing family from Latvia, but you have to go to the International Tracing Service, for example, in Paderborn in Germany, or you may have to go to the archives in what they call where the old Roland Street jail was in Cape Town, South Africa. So it is more than just the place where they came from, it's also places where people went to. But I would say the third most important aspect would be perseverance. The fact that you're looking at people, you're trying to find places where they came from and places where you must research. Perseverance is really the essence of it. And that requires, I would say, essentially tremendous detective work. In a way, you become, as a sort of amateur Sherlock Holmes, the Arthur Conan Doyle version of plodding away and, aha, you find something and then you build things on that. Or you can try more the Hercule Poirot of Agatha Christie. But when you look at those 2 characters, it's a little bit old world. So now you look at the new version of Sherlock Holmes and you go to Benedict Cumberbatch, and you see the new version whereby his clues are text messaging, digital, smartphones, computerization. And in the olden days, you'd work with Sherlock Holmes looking at something, making a note, looking at a piece of paper, writing a letter. Now, instead, it is considerably technologically based. Now, looking at that, I was looking out of my window, and that's what I saw. And I thought, well, this is pretty far. This is Canada. This is what Canada would look like today. When you look out, in the middle of winter, you look out on a lake, and that's what you see, and you say, well, Canada is pretty far from Latvia. And where am I going from there to try and come to Latvia and try and see if I can find family roots from such a far place away? So it's a very, very big jump. But what has really helped is the new forms of communication. So I started basically by saying, look, I want to try and find something about my family. I'm giving you a description of how to search, but just to talk about how to search without personalizing it can become meaningless. So what I'm trying to do is personalize it as much as I possibly can. And the question then becomes, where does one actually start? The most difficult part, I think, of genealogy is where do you actually start? And in that regard, you look around the house, you look and you say, are there any photos? Are there any sort of family memories that you can come across? Are there any websites that you can look at? You look at search engines and hope that from the search engines you'll pick up something. Then, of course, one of the most important of all would be to look at archives. But you cannot go to an archive unless you can ask the right question. You can't just go to an archive and say, look, I think my father came from somewhere in Latvia, can you help me find? You've got to at least know your father's name, which I didn't know. I didn't know his proper name. I thought I did, but it wasn't. You have to know the date of birth. You should at least know where he was born. Now, unless you have some of those things, it becomes very difficult. Then maybe cemetery searches, maybe records and books that you find in the family. Then, alternatively, you can talk to people. So in doing all of that, in doing all those 5 or 6 or 7 things, it's not what I call clear-cut. It's detective work. You've got to pick one of those things. You may have an aunt who will tell you. You may have a book that will tell you. You may have some documents. Now, in my case, I had really just about nothing to start off with. I knew my father came from Latvia. I knew he came from Grobin, and I thought he was married in Grobin, but I realized he was part of the USSR. I also knew at that stage that Liepaja was a closed port, and no one, well, he didn't know what happened to the family, but all he could do is really what I call expect the worst. Now, as you all know, Liepaja was a closed port, so there's no point when I decided I wanted to work on genealogy, there was no point in going to Liepaja, because you know the fortifications in Liepaja. This is a photograph of it, of one of them. There's no way the Russians would have allowed me in to go and try and find out about my family. I mean, it's just not going to happen. All the fortress was there. All that could have happened is that I probably would have landed up in Karosta prison in one of those cells. They probably would have thought I was an American spy or Canadian spy with a South African accent. And the result was that I wouldn't have got anywhere. But suddenly things changed. So I had to look somewhere to find something. And very often something may be hidden in the attic of your house. So you look for something that has lain there for many years, and a suitcase, for example. Now, this is not the real suitcase. This is a mock-up. My attic does not really look like that, but I wanted to show you what an attic could look like and what you may find in an attic when things, belong there to the previous generation. Now, you find things all over. Here is an album, for example, but it wasn't lying in the attic. It was lying in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which I did not know about. But things are around, but you've got to get to them. I had a photograph of a guy with a little Charlie Chaplin moustache. I did not know who he was. I thought he could be a relative. but I had no idea how he was sort of related. But I could see the Blumberga, I assumed he was a member of the family, but I had no idea who he was. So that's what you start off. Then my father had a scrap of paper from a guy who wrote a letter, and he wrote a letter on this advert for "I did not interview the dead." Well, I suppose it's pretty difficult to interview the dead, but, you know, it could have had something to do with a seance or something, I don't know, but whatever it was, he wrote a letter to a woman called Bertha, and it was in German, so I couldn't read it, and but it was interesting, and my father told me that he was a cousin, and he came from Latvia, and his middle name was Pablo. Now, I don't know if you know any Pablos born in Latvia. Well, I subsequently found out that Pablo is not really a Latvian name, but my father said he was a cousin from Latvia. So it was all a bit confusing. So there I had my father, and there were two little girls, and that was another photograph I had. So altogether in those days, we didn't collect thousands of digital photographs. You know, if the family had a few photographs, that was it. And there I have a picture of my father with two little girls, and he told me they were cousins from a place in South Africa called Durban, but I didn't know really what type of cousin. So I'm giving you this background to show you how the search process went, and how everything depends on what you can find, and there's no clear-cut mathematical, scientific way of doing this. So then I thought, well, I found a letter from this guy, David P. Boda, written to the Jewish community, where he said he's interested in finding family of a former Bertha Blumberg. But again, that didn't tell me anything because I didn't really know who Bertha Blumberg was. But had I asked, as we all say, when you start searching, had I asked my father some questions while he was alive, it would have made all the difference. Now, that sign of Blumberg, if I'd asked him, well, who is he could have told me. I never asked him if he had brothers or sisters. I did not know if he had brothers or sisters. He did not know if anyone survived. Was there any family elsewhere? Well, I know he went from Latvia to America, but I didn't know any family in America. Then he went from New York to Greenville, Mississippi. I couldn't understand why anyone would go from New York to live in Greenville, which was a one-horse shtetl, as far as I could understand. And then he went to South Africa. Then he went to a village which was really small, smaller than, I think, Grobina, a tiny village in South Africa. And I thought, well, why? And he said he went to work for an uncle by the name of Mr. Gabby, which didn't mean anything to me. So I was interested to find out whether there was any family left in the USA, and who was this guy called David Pablo Boda. So where does one actually start? Okay, that is all the information I had, and this gives you an idea of basically where do you go from here, not knowing anything. So there are today there are search engines, there are databases, there are family websites, there are shtetl websites, there are social interaction networks, and none of this stuff was available originally. It only came to the fore probably in the last 10 or 15 years. And without that, I would not have been able to start. So if you look at some of these, for example, you look at the databases, the biggest Jewish database is Jewish Gen. And they've got, I would say, just in terms of people who are researching, they've got over 50,000 people who've researched on Jewish Gen, their Jewish background. Then, of course, a very prominent one, I would say, for Latvia is the Names and Fates Project, which gives you a very, very good introduction to it all. Yad Vashem, then the family search website, which is part of the Mormon, if I may use the word, empire, and then Genealogical, and then RootsWeb, again, which is a very big database, Ancestry, which is, again, enormous, and also partly affiliated with Ancestry, and genealogy.com, Family Tree Maker. So there are a number of these websites, and it's a matter of going through every one of them, putting in Blumberg, trying to find something, if something will crop up. Yes, a lot of Blumbergs appear, I mean, I could look at the New York phone book. There must be 500 Blumbergs in the New York phone book. I even found a Henry Blumberg, my name. My second name is Gerald. There was even a Gerald Blumberg. So I thought the easy way, I arrive in New York one day, I look at the phone book, I see a Henry Blumberg, I phone him. I tell him, my name is Henry, I'm from a town in South Africa called Port Elizabeth. I could only imagine what he thought. I mean, he probably thought I'm a Meshuggah. A guy phones him and he says his name's Henry Blumberg from Port Elizabeth. No, what do you want? Well, in any case, he was quite charming, and I told him, I see there's also a Gerald. He said, it's my cousin. But he didn't know, related, not related. I mean, it was just interesting, anecdotal, but it doesn't take you anywhere. So I now go specifically to the website. So you look at Jewish Gen, and this is what the portal looks like. And you start off from that, and you search the surname, you search for the town, and they've got different what they call special interest groups, and the Latvia, the Lithuanian, the JRI, which is Poland, the Ukrainian. So you go to them and you try and access material from that. But again, it is limited. It's only what people have managed to translate and actually put on it. So you go there, you look at all this, and maybe you're lucky. Then part of it, as I mentioned, the one group is called the Latvia SIG, now known as Latvia Jewish Connections, and they have a picture there. This is actually a photograph that I took that I put on the website there. But again, it's got the history of Latvia, shtetl memories, shtetl focus, Latvian Jewish intelligentsia, book reviews, but there wasn't anything there that actually gave me a connection with the Blumbergs. Then I went to what they call Jewish Gen Family Finder. You put your name in there and you say, I'm looking for family of Julius Blumberg, who comes from Grobin, and then somebody else looks at it and maybe we have a match. So I find on Jewish Gen Family Finder, there were over 80,000 genealogists who've gone to that. There are over 400,000 entries, 100,000 ancestral names, 18,000 town names, but I couldn't get anything from that. So then I go and I look at the researchers. On Blumberg alone, there were 17 researchers. You can see BLU, BLOO, and you can see there Blumberg, about fourth from the top, Blumberg, Grabina, Latvia, Henry Blumberg, 2006. So that's 9 years ago, and I can tell you that in the 9 years, I have not had one result from this yet. So far, you wonder, well, why am I in the business? I'm not getting anywhere. I mean, I've been looking, I'm not getting anywhere. So then there's another thing called Jewish Gen Family Links. I go to that, I look at that, and it says the Blumberg family traces its origins to Latvia on the side of Henry Blumberg and to Lithuania on the side of Marcia Blumberg. And I give the story there, and here you can contact me and everything. Again, people wrote to me, but it really didn't get me anywhere. So that didn't help. So there again, there are some other Blumbergs. I wrote to some of them. It was very interesting. I met some of them, wonderful people, but again, there was no connection. So then I go to this other, there's another website, and anyone who's doing genealogy would have to, as it were, troll through all of these various websites. So this one's called the Generations Network, and there again you can see various Blumbergs. There's a Julius Blumberg from New York. My father was Julius Blumberg, but I'm sure it's not him. Blumberg relatives, but again, there was nothing there. So again, you look over, searching Blumberg from Liebau, Georgina Rosengarten. I was in contact with her. Alexis Blumberg was also looking for Liebau. I found he's a very nice guy. He's a guitarist, a professional guitarist from Belgium. Again, that didn't particularly help. So then I looked at the Yad Vashem website. Now, these are all websites that one has to work one's way through, because my point is you don't know what you will find where. So far, nothing has helped. So now I think to myself, my father was on a boat with two young girls. The boat comes from, it's a passenger boat going from Durban to Cape Town. It goes through Port Elizabeth, and they were obviously on a cruise, and my father met them at the harbor, and they took the photograph. Now, he said they were cousins. If I could find them, If I could find these 2 little girls, I'll be okay, because maybe they know more than I do. So, but question, where are they? They're probably married, and if anything, they've left South Africa. But maybe they can give me a lead. So that's where I start. So now I'm going through small websites, not big ones, small all over the place. And for 2 years, I'm looking at websites, I'm looking at websites. There I come across a very, very plain, simple website called Family Genealogies. And suddenly I see a funny thing. I knew the name was Kunigfest, and there I find Kunigfest on the website, and I find Maureen Kunigfest, and she married a guy called Richard Fane, and the sister was Maxine, married a guy called Searles, and it looked like they got divorced, and she married a guy called Breiteman. So now I know their married names. Well, what do you do with that? They could be anywhere in the world. So now you go through telephone books, and you try and find where Richard Fane or Maureen Fane could be. Eventually, I find Maxine in New York. So I phone from Canada, I phone New York, and I get through, and a man answers the phone, and I said, well, can I speak to Maxine? And he says, Maxine is not here. So I said, okay, when is she coming back? So in a very strong voice, he says to me, Maxine is not coming back. Okay, so that's a nice dead end. But I knew there was something. So I start, explaining why, how, what. So he said, well, he says, if you want to talk to her, she's somewhere in Carmel in California. I don't know, and he didn't want to talk anymore. So again, go onto the internet, one thing or another, find her, and I speak to her, and she said, look, I don't know anything. But if you phone my sister, she's in Israel, she knows something about family. So I contact her, and there she is, second from the left. And that is her husband, second from the right. But that took, by the time I started until I found her, that took 3 or 4 years. So when I was in Israel, I was able to get together with her and my one son on the extreme left and the third from the right. So at least I met Maureen, and she told me that they'd done some family research. And from that, from the family research, I had a sort of beginning. Now I could write to the archives. Now she told me about some of the family, that basically her grandmother was Bertha and what the family connection was, and she was a second cousin of mine. And this is another cousin then from South Africa, but now I could write to the archives and tell them that my father's name was Yudel. I could give the date of birth and say he was born in Grobin, and the archives could then hopefully give me some information. But, well, you all know the archives, and what I found, I wrote to them, and I found they were incredibly helpful, and I got a wonderful letter back from Irina Weinberger and Jelena Polov-Siva, and I met them afterwards, and I mean, all I can say is that they have been doing incredible work. And Rita Bogdanova has also been amazing in what they've all done for genealogy for the Latvian Jewish community. But I get a letter back from them saying, by the way, your father's name wasn't Yudel, it was Sundel, S-U-N-D-L. So I had my father's name wrong, but it was pretty close. The date of birth I had wrong, because where it was like a slash, I thought it was a 1. And when I said he was born in Grobina, he wasn't born in Grobina, he was born in Libau. But other than that, I knew the name was Blumberg. But from Maureen, I at least got something. So I got the letter from the Latvian archives, which then started setting me right. And in that, they give me the information. But then I get another letter, which was incredible, and it says, my name is Rita Bogdanova, and I'm working at the Latvian State Historical Archives, and I'm a descendant of the Blumberg family. Now, that made a very big impact, because she was a cousin. So, as I said to my wife at the time, Bella was alive, should we go over? And my wife sort of doesn't vacillate on decisions, so she said, fine. So I said, when? She said, well, let's go in the next week or two. Why wait? So anyway, here we are on our reunion, and now at least I found somebody in Latvia that was alive. The Blumberg family, the last members of the Blumberg family alive. Now, at least from nowhere, I have found family, and I now started finding out what had happened to the family. And then I found that he was actually my uncle. But I did not know. I wanted to then find out, where is that place? And Bella said, look, that shop was not in Libau. Where is it? So Rita said, I think it is in Mittau. And so with Leib Blumberg, my uncle, I found at the same time that he had a brother, my another uncle, Jossel. And I went to Mittau, found the place exactly where he was, and then from the names and fates, I could find out all the children that he had and that perished. And then going there, I actually found where the store was, and it's a little bit to the right, or rather to the left of this particular street in Katolische Street. Then, so I go to Liepāja, I go to the Jewish cemetery, I look for various Blumbergs on the gravestones. I find some family, but now I want to find out what happened to my uncle Jossel, and I don't know where to look. But I happen then to go to the Occupation Museum, and in the Occupation Museum, I found that he had been sent to Siberia in 1941. So then what happened to the Blumbergs in Grobina, unfortunately, it was tragic, as we all know what happened, and I went to Grobina, and I found out where originally the house had been, where they stayed. The cemetery, obviously, none of these tombstones were legible that would tell me anything about family. Then there's the mass grave there that I went to, and that is what happened where the family in Grobina were. And then with Vladimir Barnes, we were able to persuade the municipality that we could erect a board there with the names of all the people who actually were murdered and put in the mass grave. And there are quite a number of Blumbergs on that, and these are the people in the mass grave. And this is a list of people that we got from the archives. And there, on a trip later that we came back with my son and my wife at that spot. So that is a list of the people in Grobina who were murdered. And then, of course, there was a Liepāja wall with the names of the Blumbergs. And the names of the Blumbergs are a large number on that. And then, so I met this part of the family, but then I met a guy, a very well-known, respected historian, a physicist, Ed Anders, and he put me in contact with a woman called Pauline Crane in California. And I contacted her, and she writes to me, "We are so excited about you." My God, I was quite shocked, because we're a cousin. And here is Minna, a second cousin, who actually was with Bella in Kaiserwald and in Stutthof. And there I actually met her. She was a second cousin, and she had a family album. And there was a photograph of my grandmother, and there is Leib. And there is a family reunion in Toronto with Minna and her daughter with her. And then there was a family reunion of the whole family, of the Hirschhorn family, because they were intermarried with the Hirschhorns. The descendant of the Hirschhorns, and if I can have a few more minutes here, I'll just round this off. But the Hirschhorns, I don't know if you know, in Washington, there's a Hirschhorn Museum. It's the largest collection ever given to the American government of about 3,000 works of art. And it turned out he was a family member, Joe Hirschhorn, because my father's aunt married a Hirschhorn, and that is how they are related. And he gave this enormous collection. He made a fortune through uranium mining in all places, Canada, and his office is 1 block away from mine. So then, this is the connection with Joseph Hirschhorn, and that's the Hirschhorn Museum in Washington, and that is some of the works that he donated to the government. But to complete, as it were, the study, you have to also go to other places. Now, for example, this is the ITS, International Tracing Service, at Paderborn. There I found original documents of displaced persons, of Bella, of Minna, and I spent a couple of days there going through these records. They've got millions and millions and millions of records of the Holocaust. And here's an extract of the concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. Then I went through a large number of search engines. In addition to the databases, there are quite a number of search engines, more than Google. There's just a large number that I went through. And there I found a large number of items that required research. So again, the Names and Fates Project, all the various names. But what was very, very important is meeting the people, and you'll see why. But before I get to that, this is a database of Anders that you also have to look at if you're researching, particularly Libau. And what was very, very meaningful is that this gives you the list of all the people who were murdered in Liepaja. But of course, from the archives, the Radorazki is absolutely important, but if you don't read Russian and Latvian, it's a bit tough. So this is of Zundel Blumberg, or they called Zundel, which was Julius Blumberg. But to come to perhaps the best part of the whole story, and that is, where do you go when you go outside more than records, when you need more than records? Conferences, people you meet at conferences. And there's Anne Getlin that Rita Bogdanova put me in contact with. I met her at a conference. But this guy, I met at a conference. I gave a talk at a conference, as I'm giving one now, and I don't think what's happened then will happen now. But he came up to me, and I saw he had a nameplate, and the word Lochovitz was on it, and I said, my grandmother was a Lochovitz. And suddenly, I found we were second cousins. And there I found my father's uncle that he worked for. There I found descendants of the Lochovitz family. And there I found another Lochovitz uncle buried in Chicago. You have to go to the cemeteries, pictures of him. And so, to wrap up, these are the places you go to. You have to do the research. And there's only one that was left, and that was South Africa. Why did he go to South Africa? I went and I researched in this building. I researched all over. And eventually, I found the uncle and the descendants of the uncle that he went to work for. And that was the uncle in South Africa, and that was his wife. And then I found their descendants, and then I wanted to find out about Pablo Boda, and eventually I found out he changed his name, and it was actually Aaron Michelson, and he had gone to the displaced camps immediately after the war, and he had done research and written a book, and he's become, of late, in the last 2-3 years, he's become quite famous. So that, I went to the archives in Chicago, and I actually researched all his own material, and I found family of the Michelson family that were sort of related. And then the last part, and here I conclude, this album. And the album was really of my father's aunt, my great aunt. She put together when she knew that things were coming to an end. And I read about it in The Murder of the Jews by Bernard Press, and I found it in the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And that is basically all the material I found. And the bottom line is, these are the names of the people that I put together. And that is a little girl. And you can see on the computer screen my father with the 2 little girls, and that is the woman who started it all. Well, thank you very much. And all I can say is that good luck. And I think from this you may gather you do need persistence, and there isn't one button you can press that will give it to you. You just have to keep looking, and then you will be amazed what you can find.
Thank you very much, Henry.